In the year 2005, humanity had reached the pinnacle of its technological prowess. The newly developed faster-than-light drive had opened doors to new star systems, making the dream of interstellar colonization a tangible reality. Earth, bursting with ambition and optimism, had launched its most advanced probe to date, the Pioneer X. This probe, sent to explore the farthest reaches of the galaxy, had been designed to collect data on distant stars, planets, and any signs of extraterrestrial life. But what it returned was far from what the scientists had expected. Among the streams of data, there was one message, a cryptic warning, sent across the cosmos by an unknown species known only as the Exarchs. The message was simple, yet chilling: do not venture beyond the rim. The data was transmitted with such urgency that it demanded immediate attention, yet Earth's top leaders dismissed it almost as quickly as it was received. The Exarchs, whoever they were, seemed to be warning humanity about something far beyond their understanding. But Earth's leaders, driven by the hunger for expansion and untold riches beyond the stars, viewed this warning as a mere attempt to scare them away from the untapped resources waiting in the deep reaches of space. They had heard of the vast riches in the uncharted regions of the galaxy, a new frontier that could provide everything they had ever dreamed of. The prospect of colonizing new worlds, of making humanity an interstellar power, overshadowed any cautionary tale sent by an unknown alien species. The warning from the Exarchs was quickly buried beneath a wave of excitement and greed. Plans for the first major colonization expedition were already underway. The fleet of ships bigger and more advanced than any humanity had ever built was assembled with great fanfare. A group of the brightest minds, military commanders, and engineers from across Earth were chosen to lead this mission. Among them was Captain Lydia Bennett, a young officer who had earned a reputation for her intelligence and practical approach to leadership. Despite her rising career, Lydia couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had been gnawing at her ever since the warning had been received. She believed the message wasn't just a threat. It was a warning of something far more dangerous, something humanity wasn't prepared for. Her instincts told her to be cautious, to delay the mission and investigate the Exarchs further, to learn what they had meant by the rim and why they had issued such an ominous warning. But as the excitement of the mission grew, Lydia's concerns were dismissed. The leaders of Earth, confident in their technological superiority and military might, could not be swayed. To them, the idea of stopping or turning back was unthinkable. They had come too far, and their ambition blinded them to the possibility that they might be walking into a trap. Lydia tried to voice her concerns, but her warnings were quickly overshadowed by the voices of those in power. "You're just being paranoid, Captain," one of the senior officers told her dismissively. "This is humanity's chance to shine. We've been preparing for this moment for decades. We can't let a few unknown words stand in our way." Despite her protests, Lydia was reassigned to a secondary role on the mission, far from the front lines, away from the decision-making process. The ambitious colonization project continued without hesitation. As the fleet set off toward the rim, Lydia was left behind on Earth, her warnings unheard, her voice drowned out by the arrogance of those who believed nothing could stand in their way. The message from the Exarchs was quickly forgotten, and with it, the chance to prepare for whatever awaited them in the dark corners of the galaxy. For Lydia, the only thing that remained was a sense of growing dread that the warning had been real, and that the arrogant march of humanity would soon come to a crashing halt. Yet, she could do nothing but watch as the fleet disappeared into the vastness of space, unaware of the consequences of their choices, and unaware that they were heading straight into the unknown, into something far darker and more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. The journey to the rim had begun with hope and excitement. Under the command of General Jonas Keller, Earth's fleet sailed into the unknown, fueled by dreams of a golden age. The ships, sleek and powerful, sliced through the dark void of space, each one carrying the promise of untold resources, new worlds, and the legacy of humanity's expansion across the stars. The crew was in high spirits, their eyes focused on the future, convinced that they were on the verge of something monumental. They quickly discovered planets teeming with potential lush forests, vast oceans, and mineral-rich landscapes just waiting to be harvested. The first colony was established with incredible speed, a testament to the ambition and drive of the human race. The settlers were filled with a sense of awe, eager to begin their new lives on these far-flung worlds. For the first few weeks, everything seemed perfect. The Earth fleet moved swiftly from one world to the next, setting up bases and gathering resources. The colonists reported success after success. Crops grew faster than anticipated, and the atmosphere of the planets seemed to support life without issue. It appeared that Earth's great experiment in colonization was a triumph. Yet, beneath the surface, something strange was beginning to happen. The first hint of trouble came when one of the fleet's ships, the Vanguard, vanished without a trace. The ship had been part of a routine survey mission, but when it failed to check in, a search party was sent. Days later, they returned empty-handed, the crew gone, and the ship itself reduced to nothing more than twisted wreckage, floating aimlessly in space. A series of strange disturbances followed. Crops in the colonies began to wither unexpectedly, and the weather on some planets grew erratic, with violent storms appearing out of nowhere. But it wasn't just the environment that seemed to be shifting. Colonists began reporting sightings of bizarre creatures, wildlife that didn't belong on any of the planets they were exploring. Large, shadowy figures were spotted moving in the distance, and some settlers even claimed to hear voices on the wind, calling to them in an unknown language. It didn't take long for rumors to spread. Some settlers believed they had stumbled upon a supernatural curse. Others insisted that these disturbances were simply a product of living in unfamiliar environments. The phenomenon was dismissed by the fleet's leadership as nothing more than coincidence or superstition. General Keller, determined to press forward, ordered the colonists to continue their work, convinced that the challenges were nothing more than the growing pains of humanity's expansion. The scientific teams were tasked with finding practical explanations for the odd occurrences, but nothing concrete was discovered. The fleet's top minds were baffled, unable to explain the sudden shift in conditions. But Lydia Bennett, now stationed at a smaller outpost far from the action, couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was at play. From her position, she could monitor the reports coming in from the outer colonies, and she knew something was wrong. Her instinct told her that this wasn't just bad luck or coincidence. This was something far more dangerous. The phenomena weren't just random. They were deliberate, like someone or something was watching them. She began to dig deeper, piecing together the fragmented reports, and what she uncovered filled her with dread. There were patterns to the disappearances, the strange wildlife, and the storms patterns that were unmistakably deliberate. The phenomena seemed to be centered around the rim, the very region the Exrex had warned humanity about. Despite her growing fears, Lydia's warnings fell on deaf ears. Earth's leaders, still blinded by their ambition, were determined to push forward. They had invested too much, and the dream of an interstellar empire was too powerful to abandon now. But Lydia could feel the tension building, a slow, creeping realization that the worst was yet to come. She knew that the Exrex warning hadn't been a mere caution, it had been a dire prophecy. Something ancient and malevolent was stirring in the depths of the rim, and humanity, with its unrelenting arrogance, had walked straight into its trap. The question now wasn't if disaster would strike, but when. And as the fleet moved deeper into the unexplored reaches of the galaxy, Lydia's gut told her that it was only a matter of time before they would all feel the full force of their reckless ambition. The shadows were closing in, and humanity had no idea what they were truly up against. The first sign of doom came without warning, but its impact was felt across the galaxy. Humanity's newfound empire, which had once been so full of promise, was suddenly struck by a brutal, inexplicable force. The colony on Valeska 9, one of Earth's largest and most vital outposts in the Rim, was obliterated in a matter of hours. One moment, the colony was bustling with life workers toiling in the fields, children playing in the streets, ships coming and going from the orbiting station. The next, it was nothing but a smoking ruin. The fleet above the planet was torn apart in space. Massive ships shattered as though they were made of glass, their wreckage drifting into the void. On the surface, entire cities were leveled in seconds, buildings collapsing in waves of fiery explosions. The sky itself seemed to burn as strange, silent flashes of energy lashed across the horizon. The reports from the survivors were incoherent, panic-stricken, but the few that made it to safety spoke of something they couldn't fully understand, an overwhelming force, unlike anything they'd ever seen. No weapon in Earth's arsenal had prepared them for such devastation. General Keller, determined not to lose control of the situation, immediately dismissed the idea that it was the Exirrex, or anything remotely related to the warning Lydia had spoken of. It's rogue alien factions, he insisted. Pirates, or perhaps a disagreement between local powers. Nothing more. The insistence of this explanation served only to fuel his desire to keep the mission on course, to ignore the growing doubts creeping into the minds of his officers. The colonization effort had been so successful up until that point. How could something like this stop them now? But as more attacks followed, his resolve began to falter. Ships, once secure in their paths, began to disappear without a trace. Entire star systems, rich with potential, fell silent, their communications cut off, their colonies burning. The attacks were quick and brutal, leaving little time for response. No matter how hard the military tried to retaliate, it was always too late. The enemy struck fast, almost like shadows, disappearing into the vastness of space as quickly as they appeared. The fear that had once been dismissed as paranoia was now becoming a very real threat, and panic began to spread throughout the fleet. Earth's once unshakable colonization program ground to a halt. No one knew who or what they were up against, but it was clear now they were in a war zone, one they had never understood and weren't prepared for. The fleet, which had once been a symbol of humanity's strength, was now vulnerable, caught in a storm they couldn't navigate. The first inklings of panic spread among the leaders, but General Keller stubbornly tried to maintain control. He continued to insist that the attacks were not coordinated, that they were simply the result of rogue forces vying for power in the Rim. But even as the attacks grew more frequent and more violent, doubts began to grow in his own mind. Meanwhile, Lydia, still stationed far from the front lines, and hearing little more than whispered rumors from her isolated outpost, could do nothing but watch from the shadows. The truth she had feared was unfolding in front of her, and yet she was powerless to stop it. Her suspicions about the Exirrex and the growing danger in the Rim had been dismissed for so long. She could only wonder if humanity had already gone too far. The reports she had received from survivors painted a terrifying picture. Something ancient and powerful was hunting them, and the attacks seemed to be getting closer. Desperate for any chance of survival, Lydia's fears proved true when she received a second message from the Exirrex. It was simple, yet it carried a weight of finality that chilled her to the bone. Turn back now, or face extinction. The warning was clear, but Earth's leadership was still unwilling to listen. The attacks, the inexplicable destruction, the silence that followed everything was pointing to the same inevitable truth. Humanity had wandered too far, and now they were facing the consequences of their arrogance. It was too late to turn back for many of them. Earth's ambitious expansion had ignited a war they didn't understand, and the enemy was closing in. As the once unified fleet began to splinter under the pressure, Lydia realized the horrifying reality: they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to remain alive at all. The Rim was no longer a place of opportunity, it had become a tomb. Despite the mounting losses, Earth's leadership refused to acknowledge the dire reality they faced. Their pride, built on centuries of technological advancement, and the belief that humanity was invincible, clouded their judgment. Even as entire colonies burned and ships vanished into the void, the message from the XC-Rex was clear: turn back, or face extinction. But it was ignored. General Jonas Keller, along with the other high-ranking officers, could not accept the idea of retreat. The idea that humanity's great expansion could be halted by some unknown force was unthinkable to them. They had already invested too much in the venture. Their pride, ambition, and greed were too strong to back down. So, they made a choice. Rather than retreat, they would confront the attackers head-on. The decision would prove to be their greatest mistake. In their arrogance, they had underestimated the true nature of the enemy they were facing. The attackers, as it turned out, were not just random raiders or rogue factions. They were the Vorath, an ancient, ruthless species that had been wiping out civilizations for millennia. The Vorath were unlike any threat humanity had encountered before. They were primal, merciless, and organized in a way humanity could not fathom. They possessed advanced technology far beyond anything Earth's fleet had ever seen, weaponry capable of erasing entire fleets with a single shot. Humanity's most sophisticated warships, designed for exploration and colonization, were no match for the overwhelming power of the Vorath. The first battle was nothing short of a massacre. Earth's ships, which had once been symbols of hope and progress, were torn apart by the Vorath's deadly firepower. No amount of strategy or advanced technology could save the human fleet. The Vorath attacked with brutal efficiency, using weapons that turned entire battle formations into smoldering wreckage in seconds. The few ships that managed to escape the onslaught returned to Earth with horrific tales of devastation, of entire fleets vanishing into nothing, of colonies being reduced to ash, and of the Vorath's terrifying power. But even as the human fleet suffered these unimaginable losses, their leaders refused to concede defeat. Commander Keller, stubborn and resolute, insisted that humanity could still win if they simply fought harder. "We are not conquerors by luck," Keller proclaimed. "We are survivors, and we will push through this. The Vorath cannot stop us. We will find a way." His words, meant to rally the troops, fell on deaf ears for many. Fear began to spread among the ranks, but Keller's unshakable resolve kept the fleet moving forward. The colonization program, once a symbol of humanity's brightest future, had now become a desperate gamble for survival. New fleets were assembled, new strategies devised, but none were able to hold up against the Vorath's relentless attacks. The human ships, crafted for peaceful exploration and settlement, were ill-prepared for warfare of this scale. The Vorath, on the other hand, thrived in this chaos. They didn't just fight to win, they fought to annihilate. It wasn't just the ships they destroyed, it was the very spirit of humanity they sought to break. As the war dragged on, Earth's fleet continued to suffer crippling defeats. Colonies that had once thrived were reduced to ruins, and the survivors of the attacks were left to wander through the wreckage of their dreams. Yet, even in the face of such devastation, the arrogance of Earth's leadership persisted. They refused to admit that they were outmatched, outgunned, and out of their depth. In their minds, retreat was never an option. "If we fight harder, we will win," Keller insisted, as if his will could change the course of the war. But the Vorath showed no signs of slowing down. They weren't interested in negotiation, in terms, or in victory by any other means. They were relentless, a force of nature, and no amount of human stubbornness could stop them. The story of humanity's rise, once marked by hope and determination, was now overshadowed by their hubris. As the fleet pushed forward, battered and broken, they had yet to realize that in their blind arrogance, they had sealed their own fate. The Vorath were not merely an obstacle to overcome, they were a reckoning. And no matter how hard humanity fought, it was clear now that victory was slipping further and further out of reach. The cost of their arrogance had already begun to exact its toll. The relentless attacks from the Vorath grew worse with every passing day. What had started as isolated incidents of destruction had quickly escalated into an all-out war that humanity was hopelessly losing. The colonies that had once seemed like shining beacons of human progress were now nothing more than burning husks. One by one, entire star systems were wiped off the map, reduced to dust and debris. The Vorath were unyielding, their brutal tactics growing more destructive as they moved deeper into the rim. No fleet, no colony, no outpost was safe. The human forces, now battered and broken, could do nothing to stop the onslaught. There were no counterattacks that succeeded, no victories to celebrate. Each battle ended in more loss, more devastation, and more hopelessness. And then, in the midst of the chaos, the Exarchs reached out again. The message they sent was a cold, final warning: escape while you still can. This time, however, the message was accompanied by proof of the horror to come clear, undeniable images of human fleets disintegrating in the vacuum of space, entire colonies turned to ash, and star systems obliterated beyond recognition. The Exarchs had shown humanity exactly what would happen if they refused to heed their warning. There was no room for doubt anymore. The Vorath weren't just a passing threat. They were an unstoppable force of nature. They had been systematically hunting down every race that dared to trespass into their territory. The Exarchs were no strangers to the Vorath. They had witnessed their devastation across countless worlds, and knew better than anyone the depths of their savagery. For the first time, Earth's leadership was forced to face the truth. The Vorath were not just conquerors. They were cosmic reapers, sweeping across the galaxy with a singular purpose: to annihilate all intruders and leave nothing behind. There would be no peace, no negotiations, no way to coexist. The Vorath didn't just want to dominate, they existed to erase. Yet, even with this horrifying revelation, Earth's government remained stubborn. General Keller, his resolve shattered but his pride still intact, refused to accept the full scale of the threat. "We will not surrender," he insisted, even as reports of destruction continued to flood in. "We fight. We fight until we can't fight anymore." His words, hollow and desperate, were met with growing resistance among his own people. There were whispers of rebellion, of defiance, but they were drowned out by the overwhelming power of Keller and the High Command. Meanwhile, Lydia Bennett, still stationed far from the front lines, was not so easily deterred. She had seen the truth in the Exarch's warning and knew that humanity's only hope lay in making peace with them. There was no time left for pride, no time left for hesitation. With Earth's fleet crumbling under the Vorath's assault, Lydia took matters into her own hands. Leading a small faction of dissidents who had also seen the reality of the situation, she set out to find the Exarchs and negotiate for their help. She knew the odds were slim, but it was their only chance. The journey was perilous, and the risks were enormous. As they made contact with the Exarchs, Lydia and her group found themselves face to face with the very beings who had issued the original warning. The Exarchs were not what she had expected. There was no sign of compassion, no sign of hope. They were cold, calculating, and utterly detached from humanity's plight. And when Lydia and her team asked for their help, the Exarchs revealed the painful truth. The Vorath were not merely a threat to humanity, but to all life in the galaxy. They were an ancient species, born of destruction and chaos, and they had no mercy. No matter how much humanity begged, no matter how much they offered, the Exarchs could not help. Their war against the Vorath had been long fought and lost, and they had no resources to spare for another dying race. The Vorath would not be stopped. They would not be reasoned with. Lydia's heart sank as she realized the truth. The galaxy had become a place of extinction, and humanity was the latest species to be erased. The Vorath were cosmic reapers, and there was no escape from their wrath. As she left the Exarchs, her thoughts turned to the fleet, to the people she had once believed in, and to the fate of humanity. There was no more time for denial. The end was inevitable, and all that remained was the crushing weight of humanity's arrogance. The Vorath's attacks grew more vicious by the day, and the consequences of Earth's arrogance became glaringly evident. Humanity's once proud colonies in the Rim, symbols of hope and progress, were now fading into nothingness. One after another, entire colonies were wiped from existence, leaving only the silent, cold void behind. The Vorath were relentless, seemingly everywhere at once, their strikes quick and unforgiving. The human fleets, once mighty and brimming with confidence, were now little more than floating targets. No matter how much Earth's forces fought back, the attacks only grew in intensity. At first, it had seemed like a flurry of isolated assaults, easily dismissed as the result of rogue factions or unforeseen challenges. But now, it was undeniable. The Vorath were hunting humanity, systematically erasing everything in their path. The images that arrived from the Exarchs were chilling, graphic proofs of what was to come: entire fleets disintegrating in space, colonies reduced to nothing but ash, and star systems gone dark, wiped from the galaxy as if they had never existed. The horror in the footage was impossible to ignore. The Exarchs, who had once warned humanity with cryptic messages, had now made it clear: escape while you still can. Their advice, once brushed aside, had become humanity's final hope. But even with this undeniable evidence of the Vorath's destructive power, Earth's leadership refused to acknowledge the true danger until it was almost too late. General Keller, still determined to maintain control and keep the fleet pressing forward, clung to the belief that humanity could fight their way out of this. "We've faced challenges before," he argued, "and we've always found a way to overcome them." But the truth was no longer something that could be swept under the rug. Humanity was facing an existential threat, and it was not going to wait for them to figure things out. As the Vorath's attacks grew bolder, Lydia Bennett, stationed far from the front lines, knew that Earth's government could no longer be trusted to make the right decisions. Something had to change, or humanity would face total annihilation. Driven by the overwhelming need to act, Lydia formed a small faction of dissidents, those who, like her, had come to see the truth. They knew that the only chance for survival lay in making peace with the Exarchs, the only beings who seemed to understand the scale of the threat. The faction embarked on a dangerous mission, navigating the vast distances to the Exarch stronghold, hoping for some kind of intervention or help. But when they finally reached the Exarchs, the truth they learned was even more devastating than they had feared. The Exarchs, cold and calculating, made it clear that there would be no help. They had witnessed the destruction of countless civilizations, each wiped out by the Vorath, and they knew that no race had ever escaped the Vorath's wrath. The Vorath were not just conquerors, they were cosmic reapers, born from a dark ancient order that existed to erase any who dared to trespass into their domain. And once they set their sights on a species, there was no turning back. "They will not stop," the Exarchs said, their voice a hollow echo of ancient sorrow. The Vorath do not negotiate. They do not leave survivors. Their mission is clear: they will hunt down every intruder, every race that dares to venture into their territory, until there is nothing left. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Lydia, her heart heavy with the weight of reality, understood that the Exarchs were offering no hope, only the bitter truth. The Vorath's hunger for destruction was boundless, and they would stop at nothing to wipe humanity out, just as they had done to countless others before them. There would be no salvation, no escape. The only option left for humanity was to fight, but they were already losing. Earth's government, blind to the true nature of the threat, continued to push forward. But Lydia knew in her heart that they were already doomed. The Vorath had made sure of that. The Exarch's message was clear: Earth had become just another casualty in the never-ending cycle of destruction, and the time for survival had passed. The Vorath were coming for them, and nothing could stop it now. As Lydia turned away from the cold counsel of the Exarchs, the crushing weight of the inevitable pressed down on her. There was no escape. There was no hope. Only the slow, inevitable march toward extinction. As the Vorath drew closer to the final destruction of humanity's last fleet, a grim realization settled over Commander Keller. His stubbornness, his refusal to listen to the warnings, had pushed humanity to the edge of oblivion. The colonies were gone, the fleet was broken, and Earth's resources were nearly exhausted. The Vorath's relentless assault had stripped away any illusion of victory, and now only a single fleet remained, battered and weak. Keller stood on the bridge of the last surviving command ship, looking out at the dark expanse of space, knowing this could be humanity's final stand. His mind was a whirlwind of regret, but there was no time for second-guessing. The Vorath were closing in, and they would not show mercy. Humanity's survival instinct, however, had not yet been extinguished. In a final act of desperation, Lydia Bennett, who had long been ignored by the Earth leadership, took matters into her own hands. She had seen the writing on the wall for far too long, and knew that there was no salvation if they stayed on their current path. The only chance left was a suicide mission, a last-ditch effort to disrupt the Vorath's primary control station, located on the very edge of the galaxy, in the heart of their territory. It was an operation that should have been impossible, a mission with no hope of success. But Lydia's resolve was unwavering. If humanity was going to die, it would not do so without a fight. She gathered a small, elite team of dissident soldiers, engineers, and experts who were as determined as she was, and set her sights on the Vorath's control station. The plan was a dangerous gamble, one that could very well result in the end of the human race. They would infiltrate the station, sabotage its systems, and send the Vorath into chaos, buying humanity just enough time to make one last stand. What made this mission even more precarious was the unexpected alliances Lydia had forged. Alien species that had once looked upon humanity with distrust and disdain now had a common enemy. The Vorath, in their centuries of conquest, had made enemies of many races, and Lydia had managed to convince a few of these factions to join the fight. It was a fragile alliance, built on desperation, but it was the only chance they had left. As they made their way toward the Vorath station, humanity's remaining fleet engaged in a series of desperate skirmishes, attempting to hold off the Vorath long enough for Lydia's mission to succeed. The ships burned bright against the darkness of space, a beacon of defiance in the face of certain death. The odds were insurmountable, and the enemy was unstoppable, but the human spirit, fueled by the will to survive, could not be extinguished. The mission was no less than an all-out war, a final act of resistance against a force that seemed destined to wipe them out. Lydia's team fought their way into the heart of the Vorath station, sabotaging crucial systems and unleashing chaos in the enemy ranks. The Vorath were taken by surprise, caught off guard by this unexpected strike, and their carefully orchestrated plans were thrown into disarray. It was a small victory, but a powerful one. It bought humanity precious moments, a flicker of hope in a galaxy that had grown cold and unforgiving. Back in the battle, the remaining human ships fought with everything they had left. Despite the overwhelming odds, they held their ground, knowing that they could not afford to lose. Each ship that fell was a testament to humanity's tenacity, a final spark of rebellion against a fate they had never asked for. The battle raged on, and though they were outnumbered, outgunned, and cornered, humanity fought with a courage born from the deepest parts of their souls. As Lydia's team triggered the final sabotage, sending shockwaves through the Vorath's station, the battle reached its peak. The Vorath's control systems faltered, and for a brief, fleeting moment, the tides seemed to turn. But no one could deny the inevitable humanity was on the brink of extinction. The mission had bought them time, but it was only a matter of time before the Vorath regrouped. The question now was not if humanity would survive, but how they would face their end. As the ships burned in the cold expanse of space, one thing was clear. Humanity had fought with everything they had. They had faced the impossible and had not gone quietly into the night. Even in the face of certain destruction, they had made their stand. Against all odds, humanity's fight for survival had reached its defining moment. The Vorath, after years of relentless destruction, were finally pushed back, not by superior weaponry or overwhelming force, but by humanity's unyielding will to survive. It wasn't just their advanced technology that had saved them, but their determination, their capacity to adapt in the face of insurmountable challenges, and their willingness to unite with those who had once been their enemies. The final battles were brutal, and the losses were staggering. Most of Earth's colonies had been destroyed, and the once mighty fleet lay in ruins, scattered across the galaxy. Yet, despite the destruction and the unbearable cost, humanity had managed to fight off the Vorath's annihilation. The Vorath, taken by surprise by humanity's resilience and cunning, found themselves outmaneuvered in the final moments of their campaign. The control station had been crippled, the Vorath systems thrown into chaos, and their carefully constructed war plans shattered. It wasn't a victory won on the battlefield alone. It was the product of humanity's refusal to give up, even when all seemed lost. Commander Keller, the man who had once believed that human arrogance could conquer any foe, stood among the wreckage of their final stand, his heart heavy with the weight of his decisions. The cost of his stubbornness was clear. The lives lost, the colonies burned, the fleets shattered. In the face of this destruction, he knew he could no longer lead humanity. His arrogance had brought them to the brink of extinction, and now it was time for someone else to guide them. With a deep sigh, he stepped down from his position, knowing that his era had come to an end. It was Lydia Bennett, once silenced and pushed aside, who was left to take the helm. She had seen the truth when others refused to, and now she was the one who would lead humanity into the future. The remnants of the human race, battered but alive, looked to her for guidance, for hope, and for a chance to rebuild. With the help of the Exireks, who had offered their knowledge and assistance in the wake of the conflict, humanity began the long process of recovery. The Exireks, who had once stood as a cold, distant power, now saw in humanity something they had not expected: potential. The human race, once so quick to dismiss the wisdom of others, had proven their worth not through strength alone, but through their humility, their ability to learn from their mistakes, and their willingness to adapt. The lesson was not lost on anyone. Arrogance may have been the driving force behind humanity's initial rise, but it was the humility to learn from failure, the cooperation with other races, and the relentless drive to improve that would determine their future. As humanity began to rebuild, the galaxy took notice. The species that had once been written off as naive, arrogant, and impulsive had emerged from the ashes stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Lydia Bennett, now at the forefront of this new era, knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, obstacles, and forces that would try to undermine humanity's progress. But the human spirit, tempered by the fires of adversity, would never falter again. The galaxy, forever changed by humanity's survival, now watched as they forged new alliances, made new discoveries, and built a future that none had thought possible. It was a new dawn for the human race, one where the mistakes of the past were not forgotten, but used as stepping stones for a brighter, more united future. The lessons learned in the struggle against the Vorath would echo across the stars, a reminder that even in the darkest times, humanity's resolve would shine through.